Okay, well, hello everybody. So I'm going to be talking about ascending the spiral path, which is really quite an extraordinary thing to be talking about. In our current, is it warming up? There's going to be a bit of a slideshow with this. We hope you're up for a few slides. In our current theme, we've been looking at the Tibetan wheel of life, which is like a model of our reactive minds. It's the way we typically respond on automatic, the way we respond to pleasant and unpleasant experiences, being driven round and round by craving and aversion. And you may remember in the middle of this we have our the cock, the snake and the pig going round and round, driving us around. And we looked at how our actions of body, speech and mind have consequences and result in living in different realms and in different mental states. This habitual cycle is shown by this outer ring, the 12 nidanas and the nidana chain, which Paranita spoke about last week. And we have various pictures representing each link in this chain, starting from ignorance and working all the way around to include the sort of familiar territory to us of contact or event stimulation, through to Vedana, feeling, and on to craving and grasping. So we move from one state to the next, round and round this endless cycle. And we do this because of this, because of our minds. Because there is a way out. It's our minds are the reason that we're going round and round in this endless cycle. And our minds are the key to escaping it. Last week, Paranita talked about the space where freedom lives, known popularly as the gap. The Buddha's teaching is to spot this gap. Because when we do that, it opens up a whole realm of possibilities. This space comes just after Vedana, or the feeling tone associated with with our experiences. So like an unpleasant feeling tone might arise from seeing litter on the ground, which is something Paranita said last week. Or it might be how we respond with craving to something we like to eat, whatever that is, whatever thought you have about what you'd like to eat. Could be chocolate, could be ice cream. Now the Vedana, obviously arising from those experiences, is fine. It's what we do with it that matters, because often it results in craving or aversion. But the crucial thing here is this idea of a circuit breaker. And the circuit breaker is bringing awareness to this habitual cycle. So the teaching, in a nutshell, is to spot the Vedana as it arises. That's absolutely fine. And maybe begin to see the emergence of a craving or an aversion moving away. And breathing into that and bringing kindness to it. Be in the gap. And the chances are that the Vedana will pass and a more creative response will emerge. This is a practice, this idea we introduce right from the start, but it's not a beginning practice. This is a lifetime of practice. So using our analogy of the Great Escape, you've got to imagine that wherever you're escaping from, you're sort of just peering over the wall. You're just about to escape. You're beginning to, and there's always a risk that you'll get caught again, or in our case, regress back to our old ways. So the question is, what can we do? What can we do? Well, from here, from this vantage point of awareness, we have a spiral path ascending all the way to liberation in front of us. Because just as the wheel of life is the product of the way conditionality works, with negative states, one arising from the other, before in a sort of self-reinforcing cycle. So too, conditionality is our way out. It's our path to escaping the wheel. Next slide, please. So there's a number of places in the Pali Canon where it talks about this positive conditionality, the way conditionality works in positive states, in this upward spiral of progress. Of these, there is the Upanishad Sutta, which is the one which we tend to use when we're looking at this whole idea of a spiral. And I don't know how clear this picture is to you, and it's a little bit skew-whiff. I had a hard copy of this from Padmaloka, and I couldn't find an electronic copy, so I took a picture, and it is far from being ideal. I didn't have Mahapasara around when I was trying to take this picture. So, but you can see that we have the usual wheel of life here in a sort of simplified form. And the key point, this sort of point of freedom that Paranita was talking about, is down here. So we have Vedana, whether our experience is pleasant or unpleasant as that arises. And then in the usual wheel, we'll go on to craving or aversion. That's the way we habitually behave. But in this particular version of the spiral, we have a place, dukkha. Okay, so we have dukkha, we have unsatisfactoriness. And this, in a way, is the stepping stone up onto the spiral through faith or shraddha, joy, and so on, all the way up, finally to enlightenment, or as it's rather dramatically put here, knowledge of the destruction of the biases, which it's the goal, it's enlightenment. And even then it doesn't end. You know, Sangha talks about how actually enlightenment is not some fixed end state, that it's actually like an unfolding of ever higher and higher states. So yeah. So today we're going to be focused on this path. In 2 weeks' time, I think Nagavajra is going to talk a lot more about the goal. Now, you won't be able to see them here, but there's some quite lengthy and complicated names. So next slide, please. So I've created something that is not remotely a spiral. It's just a list. My apologies. But it's just a bit easier to see some of it. And there are lots of names, complicated names. I'm not going to go through the list, so don't worry about that. But what I wanted to do is really just show how one state unfolds following the next. And also I wanted to draw on something a well-known Triratna-based sort of scholar called Divan has talked about. And he's quite helpfully kind of divided it up into sort of 3 parts, okay? Now the first part he calls the beginning of the path, but I quite like calling it the path of joy, okay? The path of joy, how we move from dukkha to joy, okay? And then there's a path of spiritual integration where we move from joy to rapture, calmness, bliss, and so on, all the way up. These beautiful sort of states, dhyanic states, to samadhi or concentration, at which point we are, in the tradition, in a good position to start reflecting on the nature of reality, sort of insight, and then on up to enlightenment. We, in terms of practically speaking, we're operating very much probably at this first stage where we're stepping up onto the spiral in the first few stages. But I think it's also worth having a little look at this whole area of integration, in particular insight and reflecting on the nature of reality. Yeah, so that's what I'm going to focus on. So yeah, next one. So, the first path to joy doesn't start off very, very well. It's dukkha. Okay, it's dukkha. It's unsatisfactoriness. And you might think, well, actually, that's okay. If the first step, in a way, is dukkha, or at least the first place we can then step off onto the spiral is dukkha, that should be okay, shouldn't it? Because we all experience dukkha. It's common enough. We all experience dukkha. So how come it doesn't seem to guarantee that we go all the way up the spiral? That's not my experience of suffering. It doesn't seem to work quite like that. So it's interesting, isn't it? So yeah. obviously the experience of dukkha, or unpleasant states, can be helpful and brought onto the path. And here it's telling us that dukkha is like a doorway in the end to higher states of consciousness. So yeah, how does this work? How does this work? I should say it's not the same as experiencing dukkha, like physical or mental illness per se, because it's referring here to the suffering caused by ourselves from our aversion to our experience. Because most of the time, we see the world around us, we perceive it as unsatisfactory. And you know all this from the Dharma. I mean, the Buddha's first exposition following his enlightenment was the Four Noble Truths, and the first noble truth is the truth of suffering. And there's a reason for this, because it's universal. For most people, happiness equals obviously the opposite. It's like this constant stream of pleasant Vedana. That's what we would all like in our lives. But it's impossible, isn't it? It's impossible. Even pleasant experiences are unsatisfactory. They're nice, there's nothing wrong with them, but they're temporary and ultimately not deeply satisfying. And we've all experienced situations where we've achieved something that we've been really looking forward to, really important, but somehow it hasn't been satisfying. I'm thinking back to my former life when I was an academic, and my main thing was research and winning research grants, publishing papers. That was what it was all about. That's how we were judged. That was my little treadmill for years and years, okay? So you put everything you could into winning grants, and you go through the whole process of writing it, having collaborators, putting it in, getting loads of difficult comments, responding, all the rest of it. And occasionally you won a grant, brilliant, that's it. And you might even go out and have a drink. And then the next day you'd wake up and think, oh no, got to do the work now. And I've got other grants I've got to get. And so that actual pleasure doesn't actually last very long. Or like you're on holiday, you can be having a great time on holiday. And then at some point, sometimes, you find that point where it's a bit shallow, it's not quite doing it for me. The satisfaction isn't quite there. So yeah. It has been said that suffering is the dance of life. And when we experience this unsatisfactorily, we usually respond with craving or aversion, wanting more or wanting something else. But instead of turning to craving, we can turn to something else. What can arise is a confidence that there is something with lasting satisfaction. There's another way that we can respond, however subtle this confidence may be. Traditionally, this is called Shraddha, usually translated as faith, although the word's not always that helpful. It's not blind faith, but rather a felt sense of something that you can trust in. The word comes from a verb meaning to place your heart upon. And this can be based on experience of what happens when you, respond differently. And it's this combination of something in the mind, intellectual, but also something emotional. Sangha actually has described Shraddha as the positive sort of counterpart, ethical counterpart to craving. As these craving and Shraddha both involve trying to move away to find satisfaction, but the big difference is faith is a move towards something longer lasting. Faith is a sensitivity to a higher dimension of truth, and I suspect it's what brings us here. When you first walked into the centre, when you heard a piece of Dharma that suddenly really lit up your heart, or when you responded differently, perhaps to dukkha, to a situation, and realise you don't have to respond like that. Last week, I ordered some money at the post office, and some foreign money, and I had one of those emails that said, it's there, go and get it. So I went to go and get it, queued up. I'd walked for half an hour, queued up, and got to the counter, and they couldn't find it. They were looking high and low, couldn't find it anyway. And and you start to have that little sort of, it says here the money should be here. Why isn't it here? You have that sort of sense. I don't understand what's going on here. Reality isn't delivering as it's promised. And I could have responded in one way and started getting a bit self-righteous about it. But I'm glad to say that's not what happened. I suddenly sort of thought, I can come back tomorrow. It's not the end of the world. these people are just trying their best, they can't find it. It's as simple as that. And there was a sort of simmering down, and then as I walked out of the post office, there was a sort of element of something else, an element of sort of gladness that I hadn't responded in any sort of negative way, both for myself and for them. So when we respond with Shraddha, respond more creatively, this sense of joy often arises. In the men's group last week, someone described a situation at work where they had to say something that was really difficult to somebody, something they really didn't want to have to say, but they knew they had to say it, and they had to they wanted to avoid it, they wanted to put it off, and so on and so forth. But in a way, they kind of sat through, they faced the dukkha, they prepared for the meeting, handled it as skillfully as they could, and it seemed to go okay. And afterwards, they had this sense of gladness, this sense of joy, having done the right thing. So what is joy? So this is a big word. A very broad word. And it can sound a bit frivolous, Now the Oxford English Dictionary, which is not something I look at much anymore, but I did look it up, and it describes joy as a vivid emotion of pleasure, a gladness, sometimes also called satisfaction. And this joy is a really important step on the spiral path as it goes up. It's sometimes called, because joy is not the same as pleasure, as that would normally what we associate with pleasure. Joy is sometimes called unworldly Vedana, and it can arise in meditation, but it can also arise in friendship, in giving, in music, in just looking up at the stars with wonder. The crucial thing with joy is that we're not trying to grasp onto it, we're not trying to hold onto it. We're just appreciating the experience, and it's like a gladness. And I'm sure we've all experienced it. Now, really engage with this joy, really engage with it. It's a fruit of practice. Sangha actually said that when he arrived back in Britain in the mid-60s, he found that Buddhists in this country at that time tended to be a very serious lot. They tended to be a bit joyless, almost like they're being weighed down by the Dharma, weighed down by the Dharma. And the Buddhist attitude is that if you're leading a spiritual life, you should be happy, open and carefree, not in the should sense, waving finger, but just that's what should arise. And that's really, really important in the Buddhist life. So joy, and then from joy can arise the next step. You can become even more joyful in the form of rapture and priti, which can be quite a physical, intense experience. Even your hair can stand on end. And this is what can arise from joy. Now, there are other paths to joy, because that's the path that we usually hear about, isn't it? That's the regular path. But there are other paths. And one I want to talk about is recollecting the three jewels. And this comes up in a sutta called the Mahanama Sutta. So this is a lovely sutta. So I just wanted to read a short excerpt from it. And it's from the Pali Canon, so it's slightly archaic sort of language, so bear with it. So on one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling in Kapilavatthu in the Banyan Tree Monastery. The Mahanama, the Shakya, approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him and sat down to one side and said, "Venerable Sir, in what way does a noble disciple often dwell when he has arrived at the fruit and understood the teaching?" When Mahanama, a noble disciple, has arrived at the fruit and understood the teaching, he often dwells in such a way as this. Here, a noble disciple recollects the Tathagata, or another name for the Buddha. But Blessed One is an arahant, perfectly enlightened, accomplished in true knowledge and conduct, fortunate, knower of the world, unsurpassed leader or persons to be tamed, teacher of devas and humans, the enlightened one, the Blessed One. When a noble disciple recollects the Tathagata, thus on that occasion his mind is not obsessed by lust, hatred and delusion. His mind is straight, with the Tathagata as its object. A noble disciple whose mind is straight gains the inspiration of the meaning, the inspiration of the Dharma, gains gladness connected with the Dharma. When he's gladdened, rapture arises. From one uplifted by rapture, the body becomes calm. One calm in body feels happy. For one who is happy, the mind becomes concentrated. So I've gone a bit further than joy with that, just to show you how this spiral appears in the canon. So yeah, recollection means paying wise attention to the three jewels. So instead of reflecting on dukkha, which is an important path as we've seen, we're moving towards something else, recollecting the three jewels. And it says here, it uses quite a good term here, it says, explains that his mind is straight, he's very directly straight, looking at the object, the three jewels. So this is another path to joy. So how can we do this? Well, there are lots of ways of developing a really, strengthening our connection with the Buddha, for example, by contemplating the figure, using pictures, using figures, visualizing the Buddha. There's all sorts of practices around that, but that can really help develop our connection. We can reflect on his qualities, his kindness, his wisdom and calmness. Another is mantras, which is a sacred sound which can help our minds to recollect the Buddha. So these are all wonderful and inspiring practices. We can also recollect the Dharma. Now, there are some people who absolutely love burying their heads in the scriptures, and there's vast Buddhist scriptures out there. But actually, what is often said to be as good, if not better, is careful reading and reflecting on just a few verses of the Dharma. Yes, there are those wonderful moments, aren't there, when we hear a few lines from the Dhammapada and you experience a joy. And lastly, the Sangha jewel. So we had a massive celebration of the Sangha jewel on Sunday afternoon. And here we're talking about the Sangha. Traditionally, the Sangha is talked of in terms of the Arya Sangha, the enlightened followers of the Buddha. But we too also celebrate our Sangha here in Sheffield. And this is a source of great joy and inspiration. So the last one I wanted to mention is the path of ethics to joy. So here, when we have a heavy conscience, this impacts on our meditation and life in general. It can sort of hang over us like a cloud. There's something which you've done. It could have been something you said, and you kind of feel that slight ouch, that slight sort of shame, from doing it. But as Buddhists, we don't wallow in this guilt. Instead, we look for guidance to the precepts. We reflect on our behaviours and mental states in the light of the precepts. In other words, did we break a precept? And if so, we recognise what we've done. We might confess. We might seek to make amends, not to repeat mistakes, and so on. And this is a really important practice in the path to joy, because over time you must start to notice the difference. Start to experience a kind of a freedom from this remorse. And it's a relief not to be trolled by your own thoughts. You did the right thing, and joy arises. So practicing, and also of course practicing the precepts positively, being more generous, more kind, more honest, these can all be associated with joy. They're all wonderful things. But this isn't, obviously, the same as complacency, going around thinking that you're some superior Buddhist, I'm a better Buddhist than thou, sort of thing. It's not that kind of a thing at all. It's more like an inner peace that arises from having done the skillful thing. So a good question is, which of these paths to joy, which work for you? Which appeal to you? Which do you have sort of experience of in in your life? Any of these sort of ring a bell? Any of these ring a bell? Okay. So I just wanted to say a bit about further up the spiral. So we have joy sort of blends into rapture. From this arises calm and bliss and all these wonderful higher mental states. And some of you will recognise them. They're very similar to the dhyānas for meditation. Because these wonderful states are available to us in meditation, in mindfulness of breathing or metta bhavana, particularly on retreats. And in this tradition, from these states arises samadhi, okay, which is a sort of putting together, an integration. It means being fully present, being a single entity without energies being wasted or being emotionally absent. We're all there. And in this state of samadhi, our mind is more settled, more pliable, and sustained concentration. In the state of sustained concentration, we're better able to reflect, to contemplate something around the nature of reality, like the three lakshanas. To reflect on impermanence, to reflect on self-nature and unsatisfactory. So and this is really important, because in meditation you can experience these realities for yourself in your own experience. You can notice them. You can notice it, for example, in your breath, in the ever-changing nature of your breath. No two breaths are ever the same. In metta bhavana, you can experience get a sense of experience of your interconnectedness with others. And this kind of insight can be really, really powerful, really powerful. Meditation offers a great important way to insight, but life offers great opportunities too. So you think major life events. I hate to mention this, 4 weddings and a funeral, had its 30-year celebration recently. Whatever you think of that movie, it was pretty shallow, but it's interesting, isn't it, that it chose these key events, weddings and marriages, and funerals, as a sort of markers in our life. I was at a family wedding a couple of weekends ago, and apart from lots of bad dancing on the dance floor, it was quite an interesting event. It was a lovely event, but also just seeing how actually quite a few people came up to me and started talking about their lives, what had been happening to them, and where things seemed to be going. You got a real sense of a sort of a marker where people were starting to reflect a bit more on the nature of life and what's been happening. And these things are quite beautiful, can be quite beautiful. Another one can be simply noticing the autumn, the colours of the leaves, for example. I mean, this has been a particularly colourful autumn and quite an extended one. I walked through the woods today and the trees are still ablaze, quite something. But in some ways those leaves are calling out to us to notice what's happening in reality. Yeah. And all this gives us a real experience of the Dharma, one that moves us from just a simple kind of intellectual understanding to one that's much more based on direct experience and a real sort of emotional connection. And actually, sometimes with things like insight, a calmness can descend as well when you're in these moments. So there's a wonderful book called The Art of Reflection by Ratnaguna, where he makes the really important point that the quality of our reflections in these sorts of things depends on our state of mind and having a still state of mind. And this requires us to make space in our busy lives. So there's an interesting question here about experiences that you've had in meditation or reflection about something about the nature of reality and maybe what happened afterwards. Okay. So just to conclude, I just want to get back to the spiral path. Okay, here's a few spiral paths. It's quite hard to find a spiral path that's actually going up. They all seem to be going down when you look at pictures on the internet. But there's something rather magical, I think, about spiral paths. Because you think to yourself, why the spiral path? Because, of course, you could have just had, as I had it on my second slide, just go up into higher and higher states in like a sort of simply vertical fashion. But when you think about it, you'd probably fall off if you went directly up like that. And I think there is a reason why we have spirals in as a depiction of the spiritual path, because actually it's more of a gradual ascent. It's more of a gradual ascent. And the other thing you could say is that in a way the incline of these spirals is actually what you need at that point in time. You know, you might like to progress faster, you know, up a steeper path, but actually you are where you are. And actually perhaps the spiral, in a sense, is kind of saying, no, there is a sort of an incline that's actually appropriate for you in your practice. But obviously don't take these paths too literally. The path isn't sort of kind of saying that if you reach joy today, tomorrow you'll get rapture, and the next day tranquility. You know, if only it was like that, but it simply isn't like that. We'll often fall back the next day or even an hour later until we reach this knowledge and vision of things as they are, until we reach this point that's sometimes called stream entry, this point of no return. We're going to fall back. We're going to fall back. The spiritual life is about getting back onto the path, whether it's through wisdom, meditation or ethics, and we have a confidence that the path will lead us to ever more positive states. I wasn't going to tell this joke, but I've decided to tell it, which is, I realise this is a genre of a particular generation, but they're breaking out prison in World War II movies like Colditz. I was trying to think what stream entry was in that movie, and I think it's Switzerland. Because when you arrive in the film, famously, you often end in Switzerland. You can no longer be captured by the Nazis, you're free, but you're not home yet. You're not home, you haven't reached enlightenment. So I think that stream entry is a bit like Switzerland, but anyway, okay. Maybe that's just a personal thing. Tell me if you think that works afterwards. So we can go ever deeper, ever deeper. I think that's the process we're involved in here. Because each day we often wake up, we're starting a new day. Often we're starting from what seems like the beginning again. You know, that's true in meditation, it's true in life. We pick ourselves up, but every day we're benefiting from the previous day's practice. And though we seem to be going back to the beginning, actually over time we will make gradual progress. The spiral path represents creative tendencies of our mind that requires systematic spiritual discipline. We need to make effort, not be willful, but we do need to make effort, and then positive states will arise. We need to work, though, really importantly, about where we are, not to bypass and have some imagined sort of fantasy of what our spiritual lives are like. It requires a lot of honesty. So if we wake up feeling grumpy and ill-tempered, that's where we are. That's where we are. And the first step may be simply a small act of generosity or a bow to the Buddha, because out of these actions, you're giving other positive states a chance to arise. We don't have to worry about the next stage. We just need to work on our current state, where we are, and trust that the next stage will arise. And to me, all these paths, what we've been talking about, all involve faith, a sense of something beyond this samsarizing of the wheel of life, to something that you can trust, something you can have confidence will bring lasting satisfaction. So just to end with, I want to end with Sangharakshita's last paragraph in his book on what is the Dharma. It's the last paragraph on the section on the spiral. So the principle of conditionality isn't just an idea. Being aware that this is how a life works can be a transforming effect on every aspect of the way we live. When any experience befalls us, when someone says something to us, or we read something, or we experience something through the senses, we can always ask ourselves whether our reaction is cyclical or progressive. Is there a cyclical reaction, say from pleasure to craving? Then we go round and round on the wheel of life. But if there's a progressive response, however faint, however feeble, say from an experience of the unsatisfactoriness of life to a feeling for something higher, then at that very moment we place our foot, however hesitantly, upon the first step of the path to enlightenment. Thank you.